Emily Carter saw the word on a March afternoon in the waiting room of a Boston hospital. Amid the rubber-soled footsteps of nurses on vinyl flooring, the cold smell of disinfectant, and white light that made every face in the room look as if it had not slept enough. She had not come to the hospital to find out the truth. She had come because Daniel Hayes had called her at 2:17 in the afternoon with a hoarse voice, saying he was in the emergency room, that it was nothing serious, just a chest pain that had frightened a coworker enough to call an ambulance before he could object. He said it in exactly the voice Emily had heard for 8 years, the voice of a man who always tried to make every crisis sound small so no one would have to stop their life for him. "I'm fine," he said. "You don't need to come." And because he said she did not need to come, she came. It was an old reflex in her, a groove worn deep by years of living in the middle space of his life, where she had no title but was always present, where she was not called family but was still the person he called when his voice weakened. She drove through late-day traffic on Storrow Drive, gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles went white, angry and afraid, hating herself a little because after all those years she could still hear Daniel say, "I'm fine," and instantly feel she had to check whether he truly was. When she arrived at the hospital, he had been taken for additional tests. An administrative clerk handed her a stack of paperwork, because Daniel had said she could help verify his insurance information if needed. Emily stood beside the intake counter holding the forms, reading through lines that were ordinary to the point of cruelty. Name, date of birth, address, employer, phone number, emergency contact, marital status. And then her eyes stopped on one short line, clear, undecorated, merciless. Married. Spouse Anna Hayes. Primary beneficiary Anna Hayes. She stood still so long that the woman behind the counter asked if she needed to sit down. Emily wanted to say no. She had known Daniel had once had a wife. She had known honor existed. She had known his life before her was not a blank page. But what Daniel had said for years was, "It's complicated. We're separated in every way that matters. The paperwork is just paperwork. It takes time. I can't blow up everyone's life overnight." He had never said, "It hasn't changed." He had never said that 8 years after the first day he stood before her in an airport and said, "If things were different." Most of the things that needed to be different still were not. Emily was not shocked in the way people are shocked when they are slapped. The feeling came more slowly, colder, like when the room you are sitting in suddenly loses power, and your eyes still need a few seconds to understand that darkness has fallen. He didn't lie, she thought. Or rather, some part of her tried to think that because it was too used to protecting him from sharper words. He just never finished the truth. He had not lied completely. He had simply always stopped the truth at exactly the place where she could still hope. And in that moment, in the hospital waiting room with a plastic pen chained to the counter, a dusty fake flower arrangement in the corner, and a muted television murmuring the weather no one was watching, Emily understood that the most frightening thing was not that Daniel was still married on paper. The most frightening thing was that their story had perhaps never had a legal place to begin, only a long hallway where she had stood for too many years, believing that if she was patient enough, a door would open. 8 years earlier, Emily had met Daniel at LaGuardia Airport on a November night when her flight back to Boston was delayed by an early snowstorm. She was 27 then, freshly out of a 5-year relationship with a man named Ryan. A breakup that had not been dramatic but had left her hollow because it ended not with betrayal, but with the two of them sitting across from each other in the rented kitchen in Cambridge and admitting they had used each other as a habit for too long. Emily had gone to New York for a conference on community communications for her new job at a nonprofit. She was young, not exactly fragile, but something in her had only just broken, and she moved through the city like someone trying to keep her posture straight so no one would know she no longer knew where her life was going. LaGuardia that night was packed, passengers lying across seats, children crying, announcements repeating delays over and over like a meaningless spell. Emily sat beneath a flickering departure board, laptop on her knees but not working, watching snow sweep sideways across the glass. Daniel sat 2 seats away from her, holding a worn paperback book, wearing a dark wool coat, a gray scarf around his neck. His brown hair lightly threaded with silver at the temples even though he was only 33. He did not start talking like a bored man in an airport. He only turned when she sighed after the 4th delay announcement and said, "There's a particular kind of loneliness that only airports are honest enough to show." That sentence should have made her laugh because it was too literary for such an exhausted situation. But she looked at him, and in his eyes there was a calm weariness that made the sentence feel less like an opening line and more like an observation someone had carried inside for a long time. They talked for 3 hours, about work, about cities people passed through without belonging to, about how being 27 could make a person feel both too young to stop and too old to make another wrong beginning. Daniel worked in urban planning and public project consulting, lived between Boston and New York for work, and had a warm, slow voice that knew how to pause in all the right places, making the listener feel he was truly weighing every word. He asked Emily questions no one had asked her after the breakup. Not, "Are you okay?" Because that question was too easy to answer with a social lie. He asked, "What did you lose besides him?" The question made her silent for a long time. At last, she said she had lost the story she thought her life would follow. Daniel nodded, as if he understood that losing a story could hurt more than losing a person. When she asked whether he had a family, he looked down at the book in his hand, his thumb rubbing along the spine. "I'm married," he said. Then after a beat he added, "But it's complicated." That should have been a wall. The way he said it made it sound like a room behind him had burned halfway down. A place she should not enter but could stand outside of and feel compassion for. Emily was clear-headed enough to know she should not fall for a man who had just said he had a wife. But she was wounded enough to hear in the word, complicated, an apology he had not spoken, a vague promise that he did not truly belong to the place where his name was recorded. When her flight was finally called, Daniel stood with her, pulling his suitcase with one hand, the book tucked under his other arm. Before the boarding gate, he said, "If things were different," and then stopped. Emily, foolish in the way only lonely people can be foolish, asked, "Different how?" Daniel smiled sadly. "Timing, mostly." That was the first time time was named as the third character in their story. Later, Emily would realize time had not stood outside, making things difficult for them. Daniel had used it like a waiting room and placed her inside. The first months contained nothing clear enough to call an affair, and that very lack of clarity made everything more dangerous. Daniel did not ask her to meet him at hotels. He did not send crude messages. He did not say he would leave his wife for her the following week. He sent her an article about social housing at 11 p.m. and wrote, "Thought of what you said about dignity in public systems." She replied, and then they talked until 2 in the morning about how a city could make poor people feel either hidden or seen. On a Sunday morning, he texted, "Snow makes Boston look briefly innocent." She sent him a photo of the street outside her building. He sent back a photo of a train station in New Haven while traveling for work. They met in the spaces between life, coffee between meetings, a lunch in Back Bay that lasted longer than planned, an evening after a conference when they walked around Boston Common in the cold and talked about decisions people could not make immediately because other people were involved. Daniel always had boundaries, but those boundaries were soft as mist. He did not touch her first. He simply stood too close for too long. He did not say he missed her every day. He said, "I thought of calling you when the train crossed the river." He did not say he was unhappy in his marriage. He said, "There are households that continue because everyone involved has learned how not to ask the right question." He did not insult Anna. That made Emily trust him more. He said Anna was a good person, a good mother, an old friend who had gone through hard years with him. But they had become two people maintaining a structure because of children, family, finances, and the fear of hurting too many people at once. He did not share vulgar details. He did not turn his wife into a monster, so Emily could love him more easily. And Emily, who had seen many men speak badly of the woman before in order to recruit the next woman into the role of rescuer, told herself that his refusal to slander Anna was proof Daniel was different. She did not see the clearer truth. By not making Anna bad, he made Emily shrink herself into a role where she was not allowed to ask for too much, because doing so would make her seem as if she were attacking an innocent woman. Their nameless relationship protected Daniel from responsibility. If Emily asked what they were, he could say they were something real. If she asked what the future looked like, he could say he did not want to make promises before he could honor them. If she hurt because he could not call on the weekend, he could say he hated that more than she knew. With no definition, there could be no violation. With no clear promise, there could be no clear betrayal. But every day, she woke up waiting for a message. Every night, she rearranged her life around the spaces where he might appear. She called it mature love because it did not demand, did not burn out of control. did not make a scene. In truth, she was learning to live on crumbs and call hunger elegance. The first time Emily chose, Daniel did not happen in a dramatic scene. There was no rain, no kiss under a streetlight, no declaration that she would wait for him forever. It happened in her office on a Thursday afternoon, when the director of the organization called her in and said a partner in Chicago needed someone to lead communications for a new program, with better pay, a 2-year contract, and the chance to build her own team. Emily had wanted to leave Boston for a while. After Ryan, the city held too many versions of who she had once been. Chicago sounded far enough away that she would not have to pass the same coffee shop, the same bookstore, the same street where Ryan had once said he was not sure they still loved each other. She told Daniel that night in a small place near South Station, where they often met because he could describe it as a work meeting if anyone saw them. Daniel listened and did not react right away. He stirred his coffee even though he had not added sugar. "That's good," he said. "It is. You should be proud." She waited. One part of her wanted him to say, "Don't go." Another part wanted him to say, "Go," so she could know he was not keeping her inside something without a name. Daniel did neither. He looked down at the table, then said, "Chicago is far. Not so far that flights don't exist. No, but distance does what distance does." She heard sadness in his voice, and that sadness made her feel she had the right to choose him even though he had not asked. "Do you want me to go?" she asked. Daniel looked at her, his eyes very tired. "I don't want to be the man who tells you not to live your life." It sounded noble. Later, when she remembered it, Emily understood it was also the perfect evasion. He did not tell her to stay, so if she stayed, it would be her choice. But he also did not release her with a clean and decent clarity. He did not say, "I still have a wife. I cannot give you what you deserve. You should go." He simply set his sadness on the table and let her decide whether to carry it. She turned down Chicago. In the email, she wrote that the timing was not right because of certain personal commitments in Boston. When her director asked if something was keeping her there, Emily said she was not sure. And that was the first lie she told her own life to protect a man who did not lie clearly enough to be convicted. The night she sent the refusal email, Daniel called. He was silent for a while after she told him, then exhaled very softly. "Just give me time," he said. Emily stood beside the window of her apartment, watching snow fall onto the hoods of cars below, and told herself 1 year was not too long. 1 year for a man untangling a marriage, for a father who did not want to hurt his children, for a love that was the right person at the wrong time. She did not know that the first year is where a person learns how to wait, and every year after that is where a person becomes afraid to admit they have waited too long. The first year passed with signs that were just enough to keep her from leaving, but never enough to bring her truly close. Daniel said he and Anna slept in separate rooms when he was home. He said they had started the conversation. He said his older son, Noah, was entering middle school and was very sensitive, and his younger daughter, Grace, still clung to her mother, so everything had to be handled carefully. He said lawyers had been mentioned but not formally consulted because once you formalize, everyone panics. Emily did not have children, and that became a distance that always made her feel she lacked the right to judge. Her best friend, Julia, was the first person to speak plainly. Julia met Emily at a ramen place on a rainy April evening and watched her set her phone face down, then turn it over every 3 minutes. "Are you waiting for him to text?" Julia asked. Emily bristled. "No, you've checked your phone 6 times in 10 minutes. He's dealing with something with his kid." Julia set down her chopsticks. "Do you hear yourself? You're in a relationship where every need you have come second to a life he says is ending, but is still allowed to decide everything." Emily looked down into her bowl, the steam rising and stinging her eye. "It's not simple." Julia smiled sadly. "Of course it isn't. The things that trap us are rarely simple." Emily said Daniel loved her. Julia did not deny it. That made Emily even more confused. "Maybe," Julia said, "but loving you is not the same as choosing you." Emily fell silent. Julia leaned toward her, her voice lower. "You're not waiting. You're being parked." The sentence made Emily so angry her face flushed. Parked, like a car someone did not need yet but did not want to sell, left at the curb with the promise of coming back. She argued. She said Daniel was kind, said he did not want to hurt anyone, said people with families could not simply walk out because of a new love, said Julia was seeing everything too black and white. Julia did not push further. She only said, "I don't need him to be a bad man to worry about you." That night, Emily went home and wrote Daniel a long message, then deleted. She wanted to ask, Am I waiting or am I being kept? But she was afraid the question would make her seem mistrustful, immature, ignorant of the complications he was carrying. She put the phone down. Half an hour later, Daniel texted, "Long day. Wish I could hear your voice." That was all. And she, the woman who had just been warned that she was being parked, called him immediately. The small social humiliations came in ways so minor that, if she described them one by one, they would sound childish. She could not post a photo of him, could not call him her boyfriend, could not invite him to Julia's birthday because someone might know someone, could not go with him to a fundraiser where her organization partnered with his agency because it would complicate optics. He never held her hand in places that were too bright. He chose tables in corners. He paid cash at certain restaurants. He could sit in her apartment until midnight, lying on the sofa reading the paper while she worked at the dining table. But if his phone rang and Noah's name appeared, he would stand and go into another room, his voice instantly becoming the voice of a life she was not allowed to enter. Emily began to learn how to disappear before anyone else had the chance to make her disappear. When coworkers asked what she was doing that weekend, she said she was seeing a friend. When her mother asked if there was anyone special, she said work was busy. When Julia asked whether Daniel had scheduled an appointment with a lawyer yet, she changed the subject. One day, during her lunch break, she accidentally saw a family photo of Daniel on the Facebook page of a mutual acquaintance in the field. Not Daniel's page, because he almost never posted anything personal. It was a picture from one of Grace's school events. Daniel standing beside Anna under strings of colored lights, Noah nearly as tall as him, Grace hugging her mother's waist, Daniel smiling a little tiredly but warmly enough. Caption read, "The Hayes family always showing up." Emily looked at the word family so long the screen locked. She knew the photo did not prove he was happy. She knew people could stand in family photos while already gone inside. But she also knew she did not have a single photo with him that another person could look at and understand where she belonged. That night, Daniel came to her apartment and brought soup because she had texted that she had a headache. He saw her silence and asked what was wrong. She handed him the phone. He looked at the photo, his face darkening not with shame, but with exhaustion. "That was for Grace," he said. "I'm not saying it wasn't. You're looking at it like proof. It is proof of a life I'm not in." Daniel set the phone down. "Emily, I never hid from you that I have a family. No, you just made me believe that family existed in the past tense." He looked at her, and there was real sorrow in his eyes. "It's more dead than it looks, but it can still stand in a picture." That silenced him. He sat beside her and placed his hand on her knee. "I know this hurts. I know. But if you turn every public moment I have with my children into a stab wound, I don't know how to live in both realities without making everyone bleed." Emily heard that and felt herself being pushed into the role of the selfish woman competing with children. She gently pulled her hand away from his. "I'm not jealous of your children. I didn't say you were, but you put it there." Daniel sighed. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." She looked at him. "What is it?" He did not answer right away. And in that silence, Emily understood that it was the name he gave her pain whenever it became inconvenient to him. After that, she began apologizing for things she had every right to feel. Sorry for asking whether he had a plan. Sorry for crying on Christmas night when he texted at 11:48 p.m. "Wish I could be there," after spending the entire day with his family. Sorry for saying, "I miss you," on a Saturday morning when he could not call because he was taking Grace to skating lesson. Sorry for being tired of waiting. Daniel did not ask her to apologize. He often said, "You don't have to apologize." But the way he received the apology made it stay. He would say, "I know this is hard," and then fall silent. He would kiss her hair, make tea, lie beside her, but offer no new promise. Once she said, "I feel like I'm erasing myself." Daniel looked at her for a long time and said, "I never wanted you to become smaller, but I am becoming smaller." "Then don't." The sentence sounded empowering, but in truth it handed the entire responsibility back to her. Don't become smaller, while he could not hold her hand in the street. Don't wait, while he said, "Just give me time." Don't hurt, while the whole structure of the story forced her to hurt alone. Emily began to lose trust in her own instincts in a quiet way. She wondered whether she was asking for something unfair. She read articles about divorce with children, about the complexity of long marriages, about how adults needed time to transition without harming children. She searched for evidence that patience was love. She also searched for evidence that waiting for a married man was self-destruction. The internet gave her both, depending on the words she typed. Every time she decided to leave, Daniel would make a small movement toward her. A rare weekend in Vermont, where they rented a cabin under her name and walked through snowy woods like an ordinary couple for 48 hours. An email he forwarded from a divorce lawyer with the word, starting. A midnight phone call where he said he had tea. Old Anna, he could not live like this forever. Each fragment of progress was a drop of water on the tongue of someone thirsty. Not enough to save, but enough to keep a person from dying enough to leave. In the third year, small pieces of evidence began to leak in ways Emily could not ignore, though she had become skilled at doing exactly that. Daniel said he was home because Noah had a fever, but later she saw a message he had accidentally sent to her work group chat because one of her coworkers was also named Emily. It read, "Running late from the Marriott lobby. Call you after." He deleted it immediately and texted privately, "Sorry, wrong thread, meeting ran over." The Marriott was not home. When she asked, he said he had a meeting with a financial attorney at the hotel because the attorney was there for a conference. "Why didn't you say that?" she asked. "Because it wasn't worth making into a thing. You said you were home." Daniel paused. "Noah was sick in the morning. I went out later. You let me believe you were home. You're using let me believe like I staged something." "Did you?" He looked at her tired. "Emily?" She hated the way he said her name when he wanted to make her question sound like proof that she had gone too far. Another time, he said he and Anna had nearly agreed to sell the house once Grace started middle school. 3 months later, Emily heard through a mutual acquaintance that the Hayes house had just renovated the kitchen. She asked him. Daniel said it had been Anna's decision, using money from her parents, and he had not wanted to argue in front of the children. "People don't renovate a kitchen if they're about to sell the house," Emily said. "People do irrational things during grief. You're calling your wife's kitchen renovation grief. I'm calling all of this grief." "Then what am I?" The question escaped before she could soften it. Daniel looked at her, and for the first time she saw something in him that was close to angry helplessness. "You are the person I love, but not the person you're building a kitchen with." He stood up from the table. "That's unfair." "Unfair to whom?" "To me. To the situation. To all the things you know are not simple." Emily laughed, a small, dry sound. "I hate the phrase not simple, because you want a clean villain." "No," she said. "I want an answer." Daniel stood beside the window and looked out at the street. "I'm trying to fix everything." It was a promise, but it had no specific subject, no date, no real verb. Fix everything. A beautiful box with nothing inside. Emily held onto it for 2 more years. During those years, her life began revolving around the waiting in ways outsiders could barely see. She did not take the job in Chicago. Later, she turned down a communications director role in Seattle because Daniel said he and Anna were entering the most sensitive phase, and he did not know what would happen if she moved far away just when everything might shift. She stopped dating, though no one knew she was in a relationship. A man named Peter, a veterinarian and a friend of Julia's, asked her to dinner 3 times. Peter was kind, slightly awkward, loved old dogs, and always remembered to ask whether she wanted to sit inside or outside. Emily declined the first time because she was busy, the second because she was tired, the third because Daniel had just said he might have his own apartment before the fall. That apartment never appeared. She did not buy the small condo in Jamaica Plain when interest rates were still low because she thought if Daniel left the house, they would need to decide together, and she did not want to tie herself to a place where their shared future might not fit. 3 years later, housing prices moved beyond her reach. She did not freeze her eggs when her doctor suggested it at 32, because Daniel said he could not think about having more children while trying not to hurt the 2 children he already had. And she heard in that not a no, but a door not yet open. At 34, the doctor said options remained, but were no longer easy. Emily sat in her car after the appointment, looking at the fertility brochure on the passenger seat, and cried for the first time not because Daniel was absent, but because she no longer knew whether she truly wanted children or only wanted to preserve every possibility that waiting had blurred. One day, Julia said over the phone, "You're not stuck. You're choosing to stay stuck." Emily was furious. "You think I don't know that? I think knowing with your head and knowing in your bones are 2 different things." "I love him." Julia was quiet for a while. "I believe you, but love doesn't give time back." That sentence made Emily hang up. Afterward, she sat on the living room floor, her back against the sofa, phone in hand, and did not call back. Not because Julia was wrong, because some truths are so right that we cannot bear to hear them from someone else yet. In the 6th year, Emily met Anna, not in a staged confrontation, not like the other woman meeting the wife in a parking lot or a loud coffee shop. They met at a fundraiser for a youth housing program, where Emily was in charge of communications, and Daniel was one of the guest speakers. Daniel had said he would come alone because Anna did not like his work events. But that night, as Emily checked the press list near the registration table, she looked up and saw Daniel walk in with Anna. Anna Hayes was not like the image Emily had unconsciously built in order to survive. She was not weak, not cold, not clinging to a man who did not love her, and not a blind wife who saw nothing. She wore a deep blue dress, her hair cut to her shoulders, her face marked by the tired lines of a woman who had raised 2 children, kept a house, and endured too many polite dinners. Daniel placed his hand very lightly on Anna's back as they moved through the crowd. That gesture might no longer have been love, but it had history. Emily felt her stomach drop. Daniel saw her, and for a second his eyes flashed with panic. Very quickly, enough for Anna to follow his gaze, Emily stepped forward because work required her to. "Daniel, thank you for coming," she said in a professional voice she had not known she could still use. Daniel introduced them. "Anna, this is Emily Carter. She's been leading the campaign." Anna extended her hand. Her hand was warm, steady. "I've heard your name," Anna said. Not sharply, just a normal sentence with too much weight. Emily shook her hand. "It's nice to meet you." Anna looked at her for a beat too long. In her eyes, there was no stupidity, no obvious hostility, only a tired understanding Emily could not bear. All evening, Emily watched Daniel on stage, speaking about the city's responsibility to people with nowhere to belong. He spoke beautifully. He always spoke beautifully. He spoke of transitional housing, of people trapped between the place they had left and the place they could not yet reach. The room applauded. Emily stood at the back, clipboard in hand, listening to the man she loved speak publicly about the danger of transitional states while her own life had been placed in one for years. After his speech, Anna stood beside Daniel and spoke with a donor. Grace FaceTimed. Anna handed Daniel the phone, and he smiled, his voice softening in the way Emily had heard from a distance so many times. Anna watched him look at their daughter, and in her eyes there was a pain that did not belong to someone who knew nothing, but to someone who knew and was also trapped inside a story that was not clean. Emily realized she was not the better choice. She was not the woman whose love would lead him to a truer life. She was only the part of his life he kept in another room, where he could feel there was still a version of himself not bound by the house, the children, history, failure. She was not chosen. She was kept. That night, she asked Daniel to come to her apartment. He said he could not because he had to take Anna home. The sentence made her laugh without sound. "Right," she said. "You have to take your wife home." "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Use words like weapons." "Your wife is not a word. She is a fact." He fell silent. Near midnight, he came. She had been sitting at the dining table waiting, the event program in front of her, his name printed on it, with Daniel Hayes and Anna Hayes added to the VIP guest list because the organizers had automatically included a spouse. He stepped inside, his coat still wet with rain, his face exhausted. "Are you leaving or not?" Emily asked without greeting him. Daniel stood beside the door. "Emily, no. Don't say my name like it's a way to buy more time." He slowly took off his coat and hung it over a chair. "I can't just walk away from everything." The sentence fell into the room like a heavy object. Emily looked at him. "I know." For one second, he seemed relieved, thinking she understood in the old way. But she continued, "Because I'm not everything." Daniel closed his eyes. "Don't say that." "Why? Because it isn't true, or because it finally is." He stepped closer to the table. "I love you. I didn't ask. But it's true. A truth that does nothing eventually becomes just a sound." He pulled out a chair and sat down, covering his face with both hands. "I don't know how to do this without destroying my children. So you destroyed me more slowly because you thought I was an adult and could take it." He looked up, wounded. "I never wanted you to suffer like this. But you let me. You had the right to leave too." Maybe he said it out of desperation, but it hit exactly where it hurt. Emily stood. "Yes, and you relied on that for years, so you wouldn't have to be the more decent one. You could say I had the right to leave. So if I stayed, the responsibility was mine. You could say you never promised, so if I hoped, hope was my fault. You could say you loved me, so if I hurt, I was the one who didn't understand complexity. You didn't keep me with a rope. You just stood in front of the door and neither crossed over nor stepped aside, so I stood there with you." Daniel did not answer. For the first time, Emily saw that he had no beautiful sentence left. Not because he was not intelligent, because the truth had reached a place his language could no longer cover. She said, "I need you to go." He stood very slowly. At the door, he turned back. "What if I can do it?" "Do what?" "Leave. End things properly. If I can." She looked at him, and one part of her, the part that had lived on if, almost lifted its head. But another part, the last part that still knew she was bleeding, answered first. "If you can, then you should do it because you need to live honestly, not to keep me in the waiting room for another season." He opened his mouth, then closed it. When the door shut behind him, Emily did not cry right away. She cleared the 2 cups from the table, washed her hands, turned off the living room light. Only when she entered the bedroom and saw the pillow where he had slept on those rare nights did she sit down on the floor and cry like someone who had just realized she no longer knew how old she had been when she lost herself in the hallway. Daniel came back 3 weeks later, when Emily had begun doing the small work of leaving. She changed her email password because he had once known it. She mailed back several of his books without a note. She scheduled a second fertility consultation, not because she was sure she wanted a child, but because she wanted to hear her options without measuring them against his life. She told Julia everything she had never told, and Julia did not say, "I told you so." She simply came to Emily's apartment with wine and food and sat with her in silence for an hour. Emily began reviewing old emails, calendars, messages, like an archaeologist excavating her own life. Chicago, Seattle, Peter, the condo. Weekends she had not gone away because Daniel might have time. Birthdays she had kept small because she did not want anyone asking where her boyfriend was. Vacation days she had not used because she was waiting for a trip with him. Photos that did not include him, but did not include anyone else either, because she had lived like a woman in love in the dark and single in the light. Daniel texted, "Can we talk?" She did not answer. He came beneath her building on a rainy evening and called from the entrance. She had not intended to go down. Then she did, because leaving also required looking one last time at what she was leaving. He stood under the awning, coat wet, hair damp with rain, looking older than when she had first met him. "I love you," he said as soon as he saw her. No preface, no defense. After all those years, those 3 words still had the power to hurt her, because she believed them. That was the tragedy. If she did not believe them, everything would have been easier. "I know," she said. He stepped closer. "I told Anna, truly, not some vague conversation. I told her I can't keep going. I'm moving out after Noah graduates next month. I called a lawyer." Emily looked at him. In another life, this was what she had prayed for. In another life, she might have held him in the rain, cried into his coat, said finally, "But time does not merely pass. It changes people." The woman hearing that at 35 was no longer the woman who had turned down Chicago at 27. She asked, "Why now?" Daniel was silent. "Because I'm leaving," she answered for him. "Not because you finally understand. Because you lost the place where you could remain not ready." "That's not fair." "Maybe." He breathed hard. "I'm doing what you wanted me to do. I wanted you to do it when it was still your choice, not a reaction to me leaving. So there's nothing I can do anymore?" The question nearly broke her, because she wanted to say yes. She wanted to find a way for real love not to be killed by time. But she had seen the timeline. Once a person has seen the timeline, they can no longer look back at each event as harmless. Daniel had not simply arrived late once. He had arrived late as a way of living. Late with the truth, late with the choice, simply arrived late once. He had arrived late as a way of living. Late with the truth, late with the choice, late with the ending, late in loving her, in a way that could survive outside the small light of hidden meetings. "I don't know," she said, and it was the last honest thing she could give him. Daniel lifted his hand as if to touch her face, then stopped in midair. "Don't leave because you're angry." "I'm not angry. You sound angry." "No, I'm awake." That made him step back a little. Emily looked at the man who was not wrong in an easily hateful way. The man who had truly loved her, truly been trapped, truly been cowardly, truly kind in parts, truly selfish in parts. And she understood that maturity was not always forgiveness. Sometimes it was refusing to keep using another person's complexity to postpone your own life. Emily's payoff did not happen in an argument. It did not happen when she found the hospital paperwork. It did not happen when Daniel told her he loved her in the rain. It happened on a very ordinary Sunday morning, when she spread every small piece of evidence across her dining table. Old calendars, emails, photos, printed messages, the condo brochure, the Chicago job offer, the Seattle email, Peter's business card she found in a drawer, her doctor's appointment papers. Not to torture herself, to see the whole pattern laid out on one surface. She made coffee and let it go cold. Spring light fell through the window, dust drifting in the air. She read the Chicago email again. "We believe you would be the right person to build this program." She read Daniel's message from the same day. "Distance does what distance does." She placed them side by side. She read the Seattle email. "We can offer relocation assistance." Next to it was Daniel's text. "This may be the year everything shifts." She looked at the Facebook family photo, the renovated kitchen, the picture of herself on her 32nd birthday blowing out candles alone because Daniel had called close to midnight. There was no single piece of evidence large enough to convict him of destroying her life. That was the frightening part. He didn't ruin her life. He just stood there while she slowly gave it away. He had not stolen with violence. He had not tricked her into signing papers. He had not forced her to refuse jobs, forced her to wait by the phone, forced her to live like a woman with no title. He had simply loved her enough for her to stay, but not chosen her enough for her to live. He stood there, tender, wounded, vague, and she placed each year at his feet like dropping coin after coin into a bottomless well. Emily looked at the list of versions of herself she had not lived. Emily in Chicago, perhaps tired but more independent. Emily in Seattle, perhaps lonely but not hidden. Emily with Peter, perhaps not burning, but held by the hand in public. Emily buying the small condo, painting the walls blue even if someone said it might hurt resale value. Emily with children or without children, but deciding from her own voice, not from the unfinished readiness of a man who already had a family. She could not know whether those lives would have been better, but they had belonged to her before she gave them away to a promise without a date. That was the truth that made her cry, not Daniel. Time was not a villain that could be exposed. You could not make time apologize. You could not make 8 years stand before the door and say, "Give me back 30. Give me back the body that was not yet so tired. Give me back the belief that loving someone meant walking forward instead of standing still." She sat at the table until noon, without touching the coffee. When Julia called, she did not answer. She did not need anyone to tell her she was right. She needed to sit long enough with everything she had not lived, that she could finally no longer go back to continuing not to live. Their final meeting took place in a small cafe near the Charles River, where they had met in the first year because it was hidden, quiet, with a back door that opened into a narrow alley. Emily chose the place not out of nostalgia, but because she wanted to look directly at a space that had once held their avoidance and leave it through the front door. Daniel arrived first, as he often had in the early years, sitting at the corner table, both hands wrapped around an untouched cup of tea. He looked exhausted, not performatively exhausted, but truly. Perhaps he had moved out. Perhaps he had told Anna. Perhaps Noah was angry. Grace had cried. Anna had gone silent, lawyers had sent papers, and the house he once called complicated had finally cracked in a way that could no longer be called anything else. Emily felt compassion for him. It did not change her mind. She sat down. Neither of them spoke for the first few seconds. Outside the window, joggers moved along the river. A dog pulled at its leash. Weak sunlight rested on the water. Daniel said, "I rented an apartment." Emily nodded. "I know. Anna and I told the kids." "How are they?" He smiled faintly, painfully. "Not okay, I'm sorry. Me too." He looked at her. "I'm not saying that to make you feel guilty. I know. I just don't know how to begin anywhere if I don't begin with the truth." That sentence, if it had come many years earlier, might have been a gift. Now it was only late evidence. Daniel placed a small key on the table. "I don't know why I brought this. The new apartment. I think part of me still." He stopped, realizing how awful it sounded. Emily looked at the key. She did not touch it. "Daniel," he closed his eyes. "I know, I can't. Because it's too late." She looked at him for a long time. "Because I no longer know how to love you without turning my life into a reaction to yours." He lowered his head. "I did the thing I feared most. I lost you because I waited too long." "No," she said gently. "You lost me because you let fear decide instead of truth too many times." He exhaled, trembling. "You weren't a placeholder to me, but I lived like one. I love you. I know. Do you hate me?" Emily looked at his hands, the hands that had held hers on cold streets, smoothed her hair after difficult days, held the phone that sent the messages that kept her going through so many seasons. "No," the answer was true. "I wish I could. It might be easier." Daniel nodded, his eyes red. "What were we then?" She looked out at the river. That question had tormented her for years. Now, strangely, the answer no longer mattered as much as it once had. "A real love in a life that had no room for it," she said. "And I mistook that for fate." he cried then quietly. Emily did not hand him a napkin, not because she was cold, but because there are moments when caring for his pain would have pulled her back into the old role. He wiped his own face. I don't know what to say to make this less cruel. There is no sentence for that. She stood. Daniel looked up, a small panic in his face. Emily, she stopped. He said, you weren't the wrong woman. The sentence was beautiful and useless. She smiled sadly. And you weren't the wrong man in any easy way. She picked up her coat. You weren't the wrong man. You were the life I couldn't live. Daniel looked at her as if the sentence had taken all the air from him. Emily did not take the key. She did not take the book he had placed on the table for her. She did not take the scarf he had once kept at his house and brought back to return. She only walked through the front door, past the tables where people were working, past the coffee counter, past the loud grind of beans, and out into the street. She did not look back, not because she did not want to, because she knew if she did, she would see him still sitting there, and love would try to turn pity into one more reason to stay. Years later, Emily lived in Providence, in a third-floor apartment with windows overlooking a street lined with old maple trees. She had not moved to Chicago, and she had not gone to Seattle. She had not bought the condo in Jamaica Plain. She did not have children, not because Daniel had taken that from her entirely, because life rarely allows one cause to carry all responsibility. But he was part of that story, and she no longer forced herself to make it smaller in order to seem fair. She worked as communications director for a housing support foundation. A good job, a tiring job, a real one. She had friends, a Saturday morning market routine, a small dining table where Julia sometimes sat drinking wine and talking about men still not mature enough at 50. She dated a little, not well, not with a completely closed heart, but she no longer walked into vague promises as if entering a church. When a man said, "Timing is complicated," she listened very carefully to hear whether he was talking about time or borrowing time as a way not to choose. One autumn, she saw Daniel from a distance at a conference in Boston. He stood with a group of people, his hair grayer, his shoulders slightly bent. She heard he and Anna had officially divorced, that Noah had not spoken to him for nearly a year before slowly returning, that Grace was still struggling. She heard he lived alone, worked too much, had not remarried. The news did not make her happy. It did not make her want to go back. It only passed through her like wind, passing a house whose windows were already shut. One Sunday afternoon in Providence, Emily sat in a park watching a young couple arguing softly beside their bicycle. The girl was crying because the boy had taken a job in Denver without asking her. The boy said he did not know what to do. Everything was complicated. Emily watched them, did not interfere, only felt an old sadness lying still in her chest shift slightly. She wanted to tell the girl that loving someone at the wrong time is not always a romantic tragedy. Sometimes it is a mechanism that quietly withdraws money from the account of your life, a little each day, until you look back and cannot understand how you became so poor in years. She wanted to say there are people who belong to you in one feeling, one season, one version, but not in the time you are actually given to live. And if they do not belong to that time, they can become a very beautiful room where you slowly die while waiting for the door to open. But she said nothing. Young people rarely believe warnings from survivors, and perhaps they deserved the right to be wrong in their own way, as long as the mistake did not last long enough to become an address. That evening, Emily went home as the air began to turn cold. She hung up her coat, washed her hands, and set the kettle on the stove. In the drawer of her desk, she still kept an old envelope containing a few things that no longer made her cry the instant she touched them. A train ticket from a trip to Vermont with Daniel, a note he had once written that said, "I wish I knew how to be braver," and the printed Chicago email, its edges faintly yellow. She did not keep them to feed regret. She kept them because some evidence needs to be named correctly. Not love keepsakes, evidence of time. She opened the envelope only rarely, sometimes not for an entire year. That night, for reasons she did not understand, she took out the Chicago email and read it again. "We believe you would be the right person to build this program." She placed it on the table beside her cup of tea. She did not cry. She did not smile. She only sat there in the kitchen light, listening to the small city outside her window and feeling a truth that was no longer sharp as a knife, but still heavy as stone. She had lived, she had built a life, not the life she might have had, not the life Daniel promised, not a life completely destroyed, another life patched together, made of detours, with rooms never used and doors no longer open. People often want stories like this to end in liberation, with a woman finally realizing her worth and stepping into the light. Emily no longer believed in that kind of light. She believed in quiet evenings making tea alone, looking straight at what she had lost without needing to call it small. She believed in not paying another year for words that had never taken shape. She believed in the necessary coldness of a door closed on time, even when the person on the other side was someone she had truly loved. Daniel was not the wrong man in an easily hateful way. He was the wrong time, the wrong courage, the wrong speed, the wrong truth. Wrong because he loved her while still leaving her life outside the waiting room of his. And Emily, finally, no longer stood there. But on some days, when October wind tapped softly against the glass and a distant siren reminded her of the hospital, of the word married on the form, of just give me time, like a thread wrapped around 8 years, she still felt a particular cold place inside herself. Not because she wanted to go back, but because time, once given to the wrong place, never truly returned.